Our next speaker is Elizabeth Montgomery, and while Elizabeth is getting ready here, let me introduce her. For those that don't know her, Elizabeth is the Water Resources Specialist on Halifax Regional Municipality's Environment and Climate Change team, where her work includes supporting safe recreational water use, riparian restoration to improve aquatic ecosystem resilience, supporting policy development for improved watershed management, and collaborating with community environmental stewards. Elizabeth's background is in water treatment, watershed management, and ecological restoration. And Elizabeth is going to tell us about a unique project to manage yellow floating heart. So Elizabeth, I can see your screen, and if you say something, I can tell you if I can hear you.
I'm ready if you are.
Yeah, all right, go ahead, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks for that introduction, Ken, and thanks to the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council for having me in to speak today. Like Ken said, I'm Elizabeth Montgomery. I'm the Water Resources Specialist on HRM's Environment and Climate Change team. I'm of European Cellular Design. I use she, her pronouns. And this is my talk about the project that we've been leading for the past several years on managing yellow floating heart in a lake in Halifax Regional Municipality. So I'm just going to give an overview of my talk quickly. So I'm going to tell you where we are in the world, what we're dealing with, what we've tried already, what worked and what didn't, and what's next. And just these pictures that are in this throughout the slideshow are all taken from Little Albro Lake, which is the lake I'm going to be talking about today. So you can get a sense of the extent of the infestation that we're dealing with in this lake. So Little Albro Lake is located near Punamukwajdijk, which is Dartmouth in Mi'kma'ki in Nova Scotia. I just want to acknowledge that Punamukwajdijk means at the Tom Cloud place in the Mi'kmaq language. And I just want to keep in mind like the place-based and like relative-based naming places of the Mi'kmaq people really call to mind the fish and the other non-human relatives who live there, and indicates, you know, the stewardship of the land that the Mi'kmaq have done since time immemorial on their ancestral and unceded territory where we are. So you can see in the picture on the left here, that's kind of the general area within Halifax Regional Municipality that we're talking about. And then the picture on the right, the larger picture, that's Little Albro Lake. So you can see it's a relatively small lake. It could be considered a large pond, I suppose. Surface area of approximately 3 hectares and a maximum depth of approximately 3 meters, but most of the lake is shallower than 1.5 meters. It's within a relatively small shore direct watershed. Big Albro Lake is upstream and Halifax Harbor is directly downstream. And both inflow and outflow inflow to and outflow from Little Albro Lake are all through Halifax Water's pipe storm system. So this is not really an environment that's in its natural state anymore. And you can see as well that it's almost entirely surrounded by residential use in a pretty dense neighborhood around the lake. So what are we dealing with? Yellow floating heart. It's a very cute little plant. Its scientific name is Nymphoides peltata. It's an emergent aquatic plant species that resembles a lily but is not related to a lily. It's native to East Asia, and where it grows, it forms extremely dense root networks, and its preference is for slow-moving water. And it really, in colder climates, it's a little more sensitive, but maximum depth range for this plant would be about 3 to 5 meters. So it's a shallow water plant. The root systems are anchored in the sediment of the water body that it's growing in, and it grows, like I said, very dense root networks and grows extremely vigorously. It can spread by root spread, which is the primary way we believe it's spreading here. Fragmentation from root fragments that are, about a thumbnail long, and from seed. I've had conflicting information about whether or not there are viable seeds coming from these plants in Little Albro Lake. The residents say that there are, and I've certainly seen some what looks to be viable seed regrowth, but the primary spread really appears to be root spread, and it has been aggressive. So on top of outcompeting other aquatic plants in the water bodies where it's growing by just like physically pushing them out of their growing space and choking them out with their dense root networks, The density of the roots and the lily-like leaves in combination disrupt light penetration into the water column and nutrient transfer through the water column, preventing other plants from accessing that light and nutrients. So yellow floating heart often becomes the dominant or even only aquatic plant species in a water body within a few years of being introduced within the depth range that it can grow in. And so in Little Abro Lake, where we're talking about, yellow floating heart is suspected to have been introduced on the lake's southwestern edge. I'll show you with my mouse on the next slide. And we are not sure if it was planted as an ornamental or via an aquarium release, but we are fairly confident that it was the human introduction. And as you'll see on the next few slides, it really quickly colonized the lake. So this is February 2010. Ken, maybe you can answer me. Can you see my mouse?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So the plant growth starts down here. This little nudge is kind of the first growth of it, but it's hard to see in this February picture. This was taken, I've taken all these screen grabs from Google Map or from Google Earth, excuse me, but this is from 2010. The plant was first reported to HRM Council as an issue in 2009. So this is very shortly after that in February 2010. This is 5 years later in 2015. And so you can see the edges of the lake, the entire lake, look a lot softer. This is all yellow floating heart. Oh, excuse me. This is all yellow floating heart colonizing the lake. And so considering that it started down here roughly 5 years ago, this is a pretty significant change in the plant community in the lake. And then you look at 2017, again, really significant increase in the area that the plant is growing across in the lake. And so really it's moving into most of the available land. Yeah, it's kind of wild. I've seen the reactions from folks. This is 2019, and you can see this whole end. This is the shallowest part of the lake, kind of down at the southwestern end. Really significant spread, again, just in another 2 years. And we are not suspecting that there are new introductions of this plant to the lake. We are really suspecting that this growth has happened just from this one primary introduction. This is September 2021. So here you can see it's really taken over. At this point, it was suspected that yellow floating heart was covering 45 to 50% of the lake's surface. And so, residents at this point are mad, right? They thought that they had waterfront property. They don't anymore, or they feel that they don't anymore because it's basically impossible to access. It's hard to paddle through these route networks. You really can't use a motorboat. And you can see on the map here too, there's some pretty obvious places where residents have been pulling it so they can maintain access to their shoreline. So some of these gaps that are along the shoreline, that's happening because of active management from residents who want to keep using their property and their waterfront. This is not because the plant is not spreading there. And then here we have September 2022. And so you can see, again, even more significant spread across the lake. And so at this point, people are feeling really frustrated. And so in September 2021, HRM Council approved a pilot project for HRM staff to manage yellow floating heart in Little Abro Lake. And this is largely because of the outspokenness of the residents and then the support from their area councilor to do something about this. This is a little bit out of scope of typical municipal operations because it's in the water and it's not happening on municipal property. So because of the outspokenness of the community and the councilor, we decided that it was worth looking into. So HRM staff partnered with researchers at the Center for Water Resource Studies at Dalhousie and with the consulting firm McCollum Environmental, who I believe is Strum now. Over the course of the summer 2021, 2 different types of benthic barriers were deployed at the bottom of Little Abro Lake to see how effective they were. These are essentially specialized tarps that get staked down to the bottom of the lake. And they use 2 different kinds. So there was one that was supposed to be impermeable, so there would be no airflow through the barrier, and then one that was permeable, so air bubbles were supposed to be able to get through the barrier, but the plant was not supposed to be able to. And that was just there was some concern about air buildup underneath benthic mats would be an issue. So that's why both were tried, but both of them operate with the intention of smothering the plant growth. And so it's more of like a physical management form. And so you can see, if we flip back to this September 2021 side, you can see here these little squares at the bottom left of the picture. Those are actually the benthic mats captured on aerial imagery. And then, as you can see, they were only moderately successful. So this photo is showing roots growing right through the permeable benthic barriers. And so they were moderately successful. Like, as you can see, there was suppression from the aerial photography of the plants in the area specifically where there were barriers. However, the barriers that were permeable by air did not prevent yellow floating heart from penetrating the mat materials. So they were basically ineffective. And you can see what that dense root network really looks like in this photo. That's a photo from the Center for Water Resource Studies. Both the permeable and impermeable barriers accumulated a buildup of air bubbles, that just from regular processes between the substrate and the water body, air was happening, and basically they needed to be burped by divers, which was a pretty, there were divers participating in this project anyway because of the monitoring that was going on through the pilot phase, but they were in there every other week removing air, which is a pretty significant maintenance effort if these were to be deployed on a larger scale. Also, a lot of sediment accumulated on top of the barriers, and so the yellow floating heart was effectively able to just grow on top of them. This may have been less of an issue if we had deployed fully, because there would be less sediment movement through the water column, because it would all be underneath the barriers, but that was a real concern that they wouldn't even work if we weren't able to get complete coverage of the bottom. And also, and this is more of a process thing, but if we were to deploy these barriers across the entire bottom of the lake, which was considered at one point for managing these, we'd have to take them in and out seasonally to comply with like permitting basically, and to allow fish passage through. And so that also is a significant effort. And the barriers didn't hold up that well to being taken in and out. So there would be some level of needing to replace that as well. And also, just to cover the bottom of the lake with mat material, not counting any of the other operational or other equipment that you need, or like the staff time or the, risk, like the safety aspect of working underwater. The cost of the mat material alone was $250,000. And so on top of that, we anticipated like pretty significant operating cost and operating staff burden. And so that led us to determine that this wasn't worth it. They worked, but they weren't so effective that level of effort and investment from the municipality was worth it. So now what? So among the recommendations that the pilot report provided by the Center for Water Resource Studies in the column was to investigate the possibility of using selective herbicide Proselicor to manage the yellow floating heart. This was in 2022 in the spring when we recommended this to council. And Proselicor at that point was approved for use in the United States in, I think, 48 states. And it was showing promising results. And they had registered for approval with the Pest Management Regulatory Agency in Canada, but it had not yet decided whether or not, or there was no decision made on that, I guess. So we really couldn't justify the effort and cost of manual removal. So we decided to wait and see what decision Health Canada would make. And in the meantime, kind of get the ball rolling on approvals, because we know that there were going to be a ton. So we first proposed this option, reported back on the benthic barrier project, and proposed this treatment option, at least to investigate the possibility, to HRM Council in July 2022, and they approved it, understanding that it would be dependent on registry with the PMRA. Then we expected some negative press around this, because we were offering to put a herbicide in a lake, and we thought that might be sensitive, but most people were interested or didn't care. And the residents around the lake were so frustrated with the state of the lake at this point, they weren't concerned about that. And, even in the CBC online news article comments, nobody was really negative, which truly shocked me more than the extent of this plant to be honest. So that was really positive to know that we had community support moving forward with this, because this was new for us at HRM. So then we started working with DFO. I really want to thank the folks at DFO, especially Sarah Kingsbury, for all her help holding my hand through this process. We indicated that we wanted to do it before the Priscilla Accord was approved for use in Canada, because we just wanted to see what it would look like, what we needed to do. We knew there'd be significant effort getting the permit, so we just wanted to get things started. And so we were working with them just to get our ducks in a row for when a decision was made. It was approved for use in Canada by Health Canada in February 2023. And so as soon as it was registered on the PMRA, we started moving forward with a Section 19 approval under DFO's Aquatic Invasive Species Management regs. And as far as I understand, this was the first time all of us had gone through this process, including the folks at DFO. So it was a really big lift. We had really great support from everyone there getting this through. And it took a long time, as the first time doing everything does. So we were really glad to have that support through the process. And so in February 2024, we received approval from DFO to do this. And then we got our provincial pesticide application approval shortly after that. And I will say we had so many partners on this project. I'm here to present about it, but it certainly would not have happened without the help of so many other folks. And so throughout this process as well, if you were at this forum in 2023, you would have seen a version of this presentation where I was like, help, here's what we're doing, but we have nothing yet. And so at that time, we were approached by the folks at the Nova Scotia Inland Fisheries Aquatic Invasive Species team. And right away, they were like, we can help you do this if it's something you want to go forward with, which I cannot thank you enough for. We definitely would not have been able to do this without them. As the additional budget that we would have needed to hire commercial applicators who were experienced with applying herbicide from a boat wouldn't have been possible with the municipal budget process. So their generosity and their time and their interpretation of this work as within their regular scope of operating really made a difference for us. So I just really want to shout those folks out here. And then also throughout this process, like I said, the residents were really engaged on this. They were really unhappy with how things were. And so we engage with them quite frequently. I have a few residents who to this day still reach out to me pretty regularly. And we also had a public meeting at the lake just to talk about the process, talk about what to expect, and talk about where we're at, kind of. And so just to and while this was happening, of course, the yellow floating heart didn't wait for our permits and continued it to spread. So just to jog your memory, this is September 2022. Big spread in the lake as well. And so we got all of our permits, and we were planning to go ahead with a treatment in September 2024. We had partners from Ducks Unlimited take some drone footage over the lake. And this is what it looked like. It's a slightly different angle. You're looking from the north end of the lake down right now, but this is what it looked like 1 week before we applied the herbicide treatment. So like I said, we estimated about 40% coverage in 2021. We think it's more like 60-70% here in 2024. And this is pretty much the entire extent of the lake that could be colonized by yellow floating heart. The remaining open spaces were too deep. So in 2024, we did apply herbicide, and I just, again, can't thank the Aquatic Invasive Species team at Inland Fisheries enough for their help with this. And so we had some things to do to comply with our permits in advance. So we were ready to go. We had screened the intake to the lake, or I guess the outflow culvert at Albro Lake, to prevent fish from entering Little Albro Lake. We also had hired contractors at Stantec, and they did fish rescue from the lake for a week prior to the treatment. It was primarily smallmouth bass that were caught, but the native species that were in there were transferred over to Big Albro Lake after being cleaned of plant fragments. And so they were released and preserved. And then on September 25th, 2025, licensed herbicide applicators from Inland Fisheries applied a dosage of roughly 50 parts per billion Priscilla in Little Albro Lake. That's basically the maximum labeled dosage. And we were able to use that because it was a small contained water body that discharged to salt water. And our goal here is eradication. So we were able to use the maximum labeled dose there. And, we were there. And folks from the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Councils also helped us significantly throughout this project. They came to all of our events, and they helped us do crowd control and public education on the actual day, where we and they were stationed at the public entrance points to the lake just to keep people away from the herbicide treatment and also talk to them about what's going on. And so the entire lake was treated in one day. It was divided into 3 kind of distinct zones that were treated differently. So I'll just swing back to this slide. So the deep zone, which was almost all of the lake, like this was the bulk of the treatment, was done from a boat using a surface spray. And basically they did transects of the lake at spraying the herbicide. It was mixed with water from the lake and then sprayed. So it was a dilute spray. And the root mats were so dense that they weren't able to use their motor on their boat. So they were actually propelled by the pump that was spraying the surface spray to get them across the lake, because it was not possible to use a motor, and canoeing wouldn't have been fast enough. We would have had to take 2 days. And then in the riparian zone, so that was basically just like the lake perimeter just above and below the high water mark. The lake water was low because of the late September application date. So we did try to spray a little bit on shore, but we really didn't, because it's not effective on shore. It needs to be in the water. And so this was done also from a canoe. The Aquatic Invasive Species team did the perimeter of the lake also with a sprayer. And then also the inlet and the outlet, these are basically drainage ditches in and out of this lake. And so folks walked those with backpack sprayers and applied herbicide in there as well. The residents repeatedly noted that there was a lot of yellow floating heart in the outlet channel in particular. And then after the treatment was complete, we aerated the lake, and that was to reduce the primary concern. The herbicide itself isn't necessarily toxic to fish, but when you have this level of plant die-off in a water body, we were really concerned the lake would go anoxic as all the plant material was dying back. And so we were aerating the lake to keep those oxygen levels at a point where fish could live in the lake throughout the dieback. And it was stressful. The dieback was stressful because it happened late in the year. We couldn't tell if it was working or if the plants just died back as they would have seasonally, but this is what the lake looked like in 2025. So this is 1 year post-treatment, roughly. You can see that there are still small patches of yellow floating heart along the shoreline. We really weren't surprised by that because of the low water level at the time of treatment. Most of the places where the yellow floating heart was still relatively dense, was where they had not been underwater when we treated in 2024. So, and the amount of positive feedback that we've received from residents on this, I've never had so much positive feedback on a project in my life. We heard from them that, it's the first time in a decade that people have spent time on the water. They had an impromptu flotilla on the August long weekend, and everyone has just been so happy to be able to have access to the lake again. And I should have mentioned this sooner. We were happy to see it gone too, because right now this is the only location that we're aware of in a natural water body where yellow floating heart is in HRM. And so right now we really were able to treat it, but if it spread to another water body, it would just be out of our control. We really don't have a mandate to do this kind of treatment on a grand scale. So treating it in Little Abra Lake is really removing it from the municipality. So from our perspective, this was also a success because the risk of transfer to another water body is just so much lower. So what are we doing next? As you can see, it was successful. However, there was some regrowth. We didn't see any flowers in 2025, which is great. So whether or not the seeds are viable coming off these plants, we are not worried that new contributions to the seed bank were made. We also saw a good rebound, indicators of recovery in the lake from the benthic and vertebrate community sampling that we did. So the density of individuals per meter squared did decrease in 2025 compared to 2024. We honestly think that's just because there's such a change in the plant community. This yellow floating heart was almost the only plant. So, the shade is different, the water quality is different, the nutrient transfer is different. So we weren't surprised to see that. And also taxa richness, EPT taxa were consistent between 2024 and 2025. And individuals were more evenly distributed in 2025. And the overall benthane vertebrate community was more diverse after the Procelicor treatment. So that's indicative of recovery. And also, in just 1 year, all the native fish species observed in Little Albro Lake prior to treatment were observed again in the fish community monitoring studies that were carried out by Stantec in 2025. There were also some goldfish and smallmouth bass observed. They were euthanized, but the yellow perch, brown bullhead, and banded killifish that had been found in the lake prior to treatment had all returned. So, and I should note as well, only one fish mortality was noted in the 8 weeks after the Procelicor was applied in 2024, and it was not at a time where there was any remaining chemical in the lake or where the oxygen was particularly low. So we're not even sure that they were related, but regardless, one fish mortality when we changed the environment so much was really, we viewed it as a success story. And so what is next for us? We are looking to do it again. We feel that we need to treat again. Because we've just really, our goal is eradication. There is some left. And so we have another permit already, or approval already, to do this again from DFO. So we're just working through our Nova Scotia pesticide permit right now, which is a more straightforward process. And pending our receipt of all those, we are planning to apply again in late June, early July of this year. So fingers crossed for us. Sorry, Ken, I'm almost done. This is my last slide. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone. I especially want to thank Sarah Kingsbury, Taylor Rombo at NSECC, Andrew Lowles and the Aquatic Invasive Species team for working for pizza on this project. We really can't thank you enough. Sherry McNeil, Chris Lord, and the rest of the team at Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council for all their support, but especially washing all of Stantec's fishing nets and gears with their boat washing station. It took all day. What a nightmare. Luke Miller at Stantec and my colleagues at HRM, and most importantly, the residents who lobbied hard to make this all happen. And if you have more questions, I imagine I have run out of time for questions. So I have my contact information up there if you want to talk to me about this. But it's been a really, really interesting and rewarding project from an invasive species management perspective. So thanks everyone for your time.
And a great presentation too. That's so exciting. I hadn't seen the photos of the results, and that's just so dramatic. And I am aware of all of that teamwork that was done, and it's just a great effort by everybody involved. It's so exciting.
Yeah, I was pretty stressed when it was dying back and not looking like anything. I needed to be talked down a bit. So this was yeah, we couldn't believe it when things started to just not come back in the following year.
So great. Just a reminder to people that if you have a question, you need to put it into the Q&A by hitting that Q&A button down below and typing it in. So we only have one question right now. How does one clean a fish? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can tell you what their process was. It was more like a rinsing situation, I guess. Right. So they had buckets. They had gone and got buckets of, Rubbermaids basically from Big Albro Lake, which does not have yellow floating heart in it. And it was basically like, very similar to how you wash dishes when you're camping, like 3 buckets. And the fish were kind of put in one, left for a minute, put in another, left for a minute, put in the third, left for a minute. And after the third rinsing, based on the best practices and also the fact that we couldn't see any plant fragments on them, then they were released to Big Albro Lake. So it was really just like a decon operation more than like a bath or something, I guess.
And then were some of the fish that were taken to Big Albro Lake, were they brought back to Little Albro Lake to help populate it, or?
No, we just removed the screen on the.
Oh, yes, of course.
Culvert, I guess, and they came through themselves. There's not really flow between the 2 lakes when it's warm. Like it's really only winter, spring. So we think they came back over the winter.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. That's a lot less disruptive. We when we were washing the fish nets, we couldn't believe how many Chinese mystery snails we ran into.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yes, you're so right. And there were chain pickerel, or excuse me, smallmouth bass in the lake as well. Like the yellow floating heart certainly aren't the only invasive in the lake, but they were the only invasive plant.
right. Okay, thanks so much, Elizabeth. I don't think we have any other questions, but
Thank you.
if